Hootan Troy Farahmand, known professionally as H. Troy Farahmand, is a California-based attorney and entrepreneur. He leads Alexso Incorporated from Los Angeles, with a focus on compliant pharmaceutical distribution and expanded access to non-opioid and nutraceutical options. A national pharmaceutical supply chain can look like a fleet of trucks or a row of warehouse bays. But for Hootan Troy Farahmand, the story starts earlier, in the less visible place where distribution is either earned or lost, the rules. It is a world built on licensing, documentation, and vigilance. One state's requirements do not automatically translate to the next. Controlled medications raise the stakes. So do shifting supply conditions and the scrutiny that follows an industry that touches nearly every family, directly or indirectly. Farahmand's career makes most sense through that lens. His path runs across law, real estate, retail, and healthcare distribution. Yet the connecting thread is not variety for its own sake. It is a steady interest in how systems hold together, and what it takes to scale them without breaking trust. Farahmand is the Chief Executive Officer of Alexso Incorporated, a pharmaceutical distributor headquartered in Los Angeles. The company, founded in 2010, sits in an industry where scale is not simply a business milestone. It is a regulatory reality that has to be maintained, renewed, audited, and defended. When Farahmand joined Alexso in 2013, it was described as a modest distributor with a limited reach. Over the years that followed, the company expanded its state licensing footprint to more than 25 states and built the ability to ship across all 50 states. That distinction matters because distribution, in practical terms, often works at two speeds at once: the speed of logistics and the speed of permission. Materials describing the company's growth highlight the milestones that tend to define credibility in this sector. Alexso obtained DEA authorization to distribute controlled medications. It broadened its catalog beyond a narrow set of products, expanding into generics, over-the-counter products, and nutraceuticals, alongside pharmaceuticals and medical devices. Each new category brings its own operational burdens: sourcing, labeling, documentation, and the unglamorous work of getting the details right. Farahmand's role in that growth is presented as both strategic and operational. He is often described as someone who approaches expansion as a compliance task first, and a sales task second. The order is telling. In a tightly regulated industry, the fastest route is rarely the safest route. Farahmand is a licensed attorney in California, with prior work in intellectual property and corporate law, and he also holds a California real estate broker's license. He stepped away from practicing law full-time in 2013, but the legal mindset remained central to how his work is described, particularly in pharmaceuticals. That background matters because pharmaceutical distribution is built on more than relationships and pricing. It is built on proof. Licenses and certifications are not symbolic. They are operating permissions that define what a company can carry, where it can send it, and under what conditions it can store, track, and document it. In Farahmand's case, law is not framed as a chapter that ended. It reads more like a discipline that followed him into other rooms. Compliance becomes part of the identity of the company, not an afterthought delegated to a back office. The result is a style of leadership that looks less like charismatic improvisation and more like controlled expansion. Alexso's growth is also described through what it chose to distribute, not just how far it could distribute it. A recurring theme in the material around Farahmand is a focus on non-opioid alternatives and nutraceutical options, especially in the context of pain management. In practice, distribution companies sit in a middle space. They are not prescribing. They are not manufacturing. But they shape what is accessible, what is stocked, and what is easy to source at scale. A shift toward non-opioid options, especially when paired with nutraceuticals, signals an attempt to widen the menu of solutions available to providers. The materials describing Farahmand's work also point to the pressures that made this focus more than a trend. Rising costs, supply chain disruptions, regulatory scrutiny, and the opioid crisis are presented as defining challenges for the pharmaceutical industry. In that environment, distribution becomes a kind of infrastructure work. It is less about big gestures and more about reliability under stress. Farahmand's approach, as described, suggests he sees volatility as a permanent condition, not an occasional disturbance. The response is not to avoid risk, but to structure it, build systems that can absorb new requirements, adapt to disruptions, and still deliver on time. Even in a business that operates nationwide, the supply chain is rarely confined to one country. Alexso's partnerships with international pharmaceutical companies are described as part of how it broadened what it could offer in the US market, including relationships with AFD Pharmaceuticals and US Pharma. These partnerships are not presented as brand-building exercises. They read as sourcing strategy, a way of connecting innovation from outside the US to the needs of providers inside it. In distribution, global collaboration is practical. It is also complicated because it adds layers of documentation, quality control expectations, and the constant requirement to ensure that what enters the pipeline can be tracked and verified. This is another place where Farahmand's career appears to converge on the same underlying interest: systems that scale without losing accountability. Expansion across states and partnerships across borders are different problems, but they share a similar demand for precision. In the descriptions of Alexso's growth, Farbad Malamed, Pharm.D, appears as a key collaborator over the past decade, with a role tied to healthcare operations and clinical insight. The pairing is notable because it suggests a division of strengths that fits the company's positioning. Farahmand is framed as bringing legal, strategic, and operational skill. Malamed is framed as adding specialized pharmaceutical experience. Together, they are presented as a team that balances compliance and clinical realities, which can be a difficult bridge to build in distribution. In an industry where trust is often earned through consistency, a visible partnership can function as a stabilizer. It signals that growth is not driven by one kind of expertise alone. It also hints at how the company may be trying to align its catalog choices, including non-opioid options, with a deeper understanding of healthcare workflows. Farahmand's professional life is not limited to pharmaceuticals. He is also described as managing a portfolio of residential and commercial properties, with activity that includes short-term rentals. Real estate, like pharmaceuticals, is often portrayed as a numbers game. But in the way Farahmand's work is described, the emphasis leans toward a longer horizon, value creation, stability, and adaptation to market patterns. In that framing, real estate is not a side hobby. It is another arena where systems thinking and risk management matter, just with different constraints. Then there is the Chevron station in Redlands, California, described as a retail venture that departs from the standard roadside model. It is presented as design-forward, modernized, and centered on customer experience. This detail can feel like an outlier until it is viewed through the same lens as the rest of his work. In each domain, the recurring question appears to be how to make a familiar system operate better, look better, and earn more trust. Design, in this portrait, is not decoration. It is treated as a way of signaling intention. In a gas station, that intention shows up in architecture and layout. In pharmaceuticals, it may show up in process, documentation, and the experience of reliability. In the formal descriptions of Farahmand's leadership, a consistent set of values appears: integrity, respect, collaboration, excellence, and vision. It is easy for values to read like corporate wallpaper. What makes them more plausible here is how closely they map to the requirements of the work itself. In regulated industries, integrity is not abstract. It is an operating condition. Collaboration is not a slogan when distribution depends on the coordination of providers, manufacturers, regulators, and internal teams. Excellence becomes measurable when mistakes carry real consequences. The portrait that emerges is not one of a person chasing novelty for its own sake. It is closer to a person building a method, then applying it across different contexts. Legal training informs compliance. Compliance supports distribution. Distribution shapes access. And a preference for design and detail shows up in places as different as a healthcare supply chain and a retail site on a California roadway. Pharmaceutical distribution tends to sit backstage in the public imagination, even as it shapes what is possible in everyday care. The industry is facing pressure on multiple fronts: supply disruptions, shifting regulations, and the urgent need for safer approaches to pain management. Farahmand's work, as described, matters because it points to a particular kind of leadership that becomes more relevant in unstable conditions. It is leadership built on structure. It treats compliance as a craft. It favors scalable systems over quick wins. It makes room for alternatives, including non-opioid and nutraceutical options, while still operating within the constraints of a tightly regulated market.